to Calling All Leaders, Conversations with Leaders for Aspiring Leaders. I am Brian Lass, and joining us today, I am so absolutely privileged, humbled, and excited to have with us Captain LaShanna Potts. She's a captain with the Detroit Police Department, joining us from south of the border, where I am today anyways. And LaShanna, I thank you so very kindly for being here.
Thank you so much, Brian, for having me.
Excellent. So, as a starting point, and I will tell you, and I say this, sort of half jokingly, half humorously, but, as far as the rank structure is concerned, I know your title being captain, and I can tell you, here in Toronto, sort of the rank structure of policing goes, front line to, let's say, sergeant, staff sergeant, superintendent, etc. And I will tell you, my only knowledge maybe is what I see on Law and Order SVU. I know Lieutenant Benson became Captain Benson, but maybe you can give us, and I guess where I'm going with this as a starting point, I know I'm greatly interested in many people watching, as far as sort of the, I guess, major succession of events, if I can word it that way, that brings you to where you are present day. Maybe you can, as a starting point to get the conversation going, you can give us a bit of an overview.
Okay, so I joined the police department right out of high school. Of course, you go in being a police officer. And then I was promoted to sergeant, which is the natural transition. From sergeant, I made lieutenant. And then from lieutenant, you're appointed. So anything after lieutenant is at the discretion of the chief. So you make captain, then it's commander. And then you have your deputy chief, assistant chief, first assistant chief, and then a chief.
So I guess you could say, as far as your rank right now, captain, would it be fair to say this is sort of the intro to the senior command roles? And I know we use that kind of like excellent. So, with that being said, certainly very commendable just to that effect. And a huge congrats, obviously, on realizing you have to present date. Now, certainly you're over in Detroit. And again, I say this with the utmost of humility. But, for me, where I'm sitting, obviously, I know Detroit has its challenges instead of, certainly in regards to a policing environment. But again, I only know what I see on the media, and we know what about the media. That's for another conversation. But maybe, you can give us, as far as the landscape you're working in, before we really start sort of maybe peeling back the layers, maybe you could talk about some of the more prevalent challenges, and maybe even COVID aside, that the Detroit police are sort of faced with right now, again, where you're located.
So we're pretty blessed. A lot of agencies are struggling to, hire police officers. We're not having that issue yet. And so I think it's just the leadership from our chief. We're really, really out in front trying to recruit. I would say the issue that we may have, just trying to retain them, and that's because suburban departments make more money than we do. But we've done a pretty good job with, having officers kind of be able to work everywhere in the department. We have a really great wheel program that kind of lets you, as a new officer, go to some places and kind of learn what the detectives do. You can go in vice enforcement and things like that. And so we've been really fortunate. Unfortunately, like every other major urban city, we have poverty. And where you have poverty, you have crime. And so we're seeing a little bit of an uptick in our violent crime, but they're seeing it across the country. And I think COVID is really playing a huge role in that.
Excellent. And that's, certainly an applicable point. I mean, you take certain urban centers or main city centers, much like Detroit, that have, maybe a higher than normal egregious crime rate to begin with. You add COVID on top of it, and certainly it's, not many good things could come out of it. Well, but to that effect, maybe, good leadership can be born out of that. And that's kind of where I'm going. So, maybe as a starting point, and certainly with you at your rank and obviously being, successive roles below you, I'm just wondering, at the forefront, and again, in sort of constellation with this landscape you just spoke about, I mean, as a starting point, what does leadership mean to LaShanna Potts to get the ball rolling here?
So I would say leadership is not rank specific. You just have a quality about you. I know many police officers that don't really hold a rank that are leaders. A lot of them are the silent leaders, the ones that officers can ask questions of. You usually take the initiative to do things. You're usually a risk taker. And so as I was moving up through the ranks, I was known as that. I was known as a change agent or a risk taker. And I think in order to be a leader, you have to be okay with failing, because you're going to do some things wrong, right? And you're gonna sometimes put your foot in your mouth. But I believe as long as you keep putting yourself out there and trying to learn as much as you can, that makes you a leader.
Interesting. And that's actually an interesting point because I'll tell you as an aside, one of my favorite leadership gurus, his name is Simon Sinek, and I tend to quote him a lot. But he talks about the idea of even leading from the front, but really leadership just being indicative of, regardless of your role, rank, structure, are you taking care of the person to the left of you and the person of the right to you? And even to that effect, once you put, let's say, a set of chevrons on your shoulder, it's not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those people in your charge, so to speak. So certainly, an excellent notion to get the conversation going here. Now, you used a lot of, I guess, language such as change agent and some specificities, and specificity is the $2 word of the day, I suppose. But even sort of to that effect, and peeling back the layers a little bit more, and things that leaders or perceived leaders, people in leadership roles should think about. Even a little bit more further than, let's say, transformational, like change agent. But let's talk about maybe creating an environment conducive to good morale and motivation and growth in those that you're taking care of. Do you say that, or rather, do you feel that creating that type of environment solely rests on the shoulders of leaders, or do you think it works both ways? What's your experience been with that?
I would say it starts from the leadership perspective. The person at the top sets the tone. And then once that person sets the tone, they then put the pieces to the puzzle in play. And you have to have people that share the same vision, or it just won't work. If I came into my precinct and I had this robust idea of what I thought leadership was, and nobody else bought into it, it's going to fail, right? So the first thing you have to do is lead by expectation. You have to be the person that you're telling you want other people to be. So they have to look at me and say, well, Captain Potts takes her job seriously. I should probably take my job seriously. And so I think it takes everyone. It takes buy-in from the community. It takes buy-in from the officers that I lead. But it also takes for me to inspect what I expect.
Absolutely. And you actually raised an interesting point, maybe something I want to explore a little bit more here. So you talked about the idea of maybe and I hate to use the word subordinate, but just to paint a clearer picture, I'll use it for now. But, you talk about people looking up to you, Captain Potts does it this way, I want to do it this way. And we almost get into the idea of modeling and maybe even grooming future leaders. So one of the questions I always like to ask people such as yourself, and your rank, your role, things of this nature is, is leadership, is a big part of leadership just that, creating other leaders? And if so, I'm kind of curious what your take has been on that. I mean, is there some kind of threshold we should be aware of? Is there so far ahead of the herd we should let someone run? I'm just kind of curious what your insights and experience has been with that.
So I would tell you, I've been blessed. I've had some really great mentors. And so I think it is a job of a leader to make sure they create future leaders. But I also think you have to be humble, right? So even if you see someone who has leader potential, you have to keep them humble. And so you don't want it to get too cocky or too much arrogance. There has to be a balance between being a leader, but also being a great follower, because leaders have to learn how to follow before they can lead. And so for me, I can only speak about my experience. I was like a sponge to everyone. Even the leaders that I didn't necessarily like, I took the bad things from them and I made sure that I didn't become those things. And then the leaders that I inspired to be, I held on every word. I wanted to learn more about how they developed, who they were. And so as I'm mentoring other people in my agency, I'm doing the exact same thing. I don't know everything, right? And I'm always learning how to be a better leader. And so my advice is just to keep striving for success. No one is perfect and we're all going to make mistakes, but as long as you strive to be successful, you will be.
Absolutely. And to that effect, and you almost alluded to the idea of learning from mistakes, or some people say, I guess you either do something right or you learn, so to speak, not necessarily using the language of doing something wrong. But, one of the things, and I want to go a little bit back in time here, and I know we had a little preamble conversation before we hit the record button about this, but, again, as far as learning from experiences, and again, there's this sentiment, as I've said in past episodes, that, a lot of learning lessons, or even to that effect, that, leadership can really rise to the occasion if it's going to, amidst the landscape of a crisis, something like that. And even with the current pandemic aside, I will tell you, as I've already told and for everyone watching in trying to be the most diligent, I guess, other half of the conversation here. I was all too sad and really to find out about an unfortunate incident that I know happened some time ago back in 1999. Needless to say, an emergent or crisis type scenario, I think would be a grave understatement, especially for people so closely attached to it. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about this scenario I'm alluding to. I know it was, I believe, unless I'm wording it incorrectly, I guess a sexual solicitation type ongoing, endeavor, undercover operation. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more for everyone watching.
So in 1999, I was working vice enforcement. I was an undercover decoy. And so my job was basically to pretend to be a prostitute and let men or women solicit sex for money. And so we started that operation that day in an unfamiliar area. We had new leadership over there, and we kind of didn't know the landscape as well. And so we had some reservations even going into the area. I was the first female out. I was positioned on a corner of Shane and Hendry, and a Bronco pulled up. And when the Bronco pulled up, there were two males in the car. I was solicited for sex for money. I did what I would normally do, which is signal for my takedown crew. And as I was signaling, we're, told to kind of get out of the area. So I started running across the street back to our takedown car, and I heard several shots. And so my mind was like, this can't be gunshots, right? This is a misdemeanor. And it was. So the gentleman that was in the car was armed. And as they were patting him down, he began to fight. And he was able to kind of get away. He reached behind himself, like almost like looking backwards. And he was able to fire a couple shots off. And two of my partners were shot. One was critically injured. The other one was killed. And so subsequently, we end up killing that suspect.
Gotcha. And again, like I mentioned, when I first read about that, obviously a very, very sad, unfortunate state of events, and certainly indicative of the, again, unfortunate realities of policing anywhere, really. No, I guess what I'm a little bit curious about, and again, in trying to examine this leadership lens, as far as the aftermath, it goes without saying this, anyone would certainly be taken back and affected. And I know we're all affected differently in such scenarios, emergent or crisis type scenarios. But I guess as far as, anyone who would have been, responsible for taking care of you, your perceived leaders, whether it's your, lieutenants, sergeants, et cetera, I'm kind of curious what lessons, if anything, may have been taken back just from your experiences in sort of the aftermath in this unfortunate incident.
I will say that in this particular incident, the leadership that we had failed. So I'm very candid about that. Which is why I now volunteer for our peer support program. We didn't have that. So when my partner was killed and there was a unit, so there were several of us, we were basically told to get back to work. There was really no assistance for us. And so a lot of us, we did what we knew to do, which was drink. And so it became that vicious cycle of just drinking, trying to forget instead of getting help to heal. And so I would absolutely say, and this is no secret to those bosses who were there at the time, that was an absolute failure.
Gotcha. And it sounds almost like it, and I don't even necessarily want to use the terminology autocratic leadership style, my way, the highway. It was maybe even more than that. Just, I hate to use the terminology, suck it up, buttercup, but that's what you always sort of hear.
Exactly it. Yep.
And again, luckily that the times have changed. And I know, speaking here in the landscape of Toronto, many policing agencies being associated with, it's almost like a must have as far as referring someone to the appropriate supports in the wake of any such crisis. So, if anything, it sounds like obviously the lesson learned was for you to realize and see an opportunity that, this is policing. Unfortunately, things like this are going to happen, and certainly by you joining and spearheading this peer group, as for such example, obviously hugely commendable to be able to turn it around that way. I think that certainly goes without saying. So, to that effect, again, I know you've been so gracious with your time here, and I'm so very thankful that you joined here. as far as, again, the idea of moving up in the successive ranks, much like you have, I kind of want to maybe examine each one, or because certainly there's been numerous steps you've had to take. So I'm almost wondering, if you think back in time when maybe you took your first step forward and first put the chevrons on the shoulder or whatever the case is, was there anything maybe specific when you were deciding to even take that first step into the world of management that you put your mind to? I mean, was there any point where you said, you know what, there's this entity or this skill called leadership, and I think this is going to be a bigger part of the equation? Did that ever I mean, was there one distinct moment that you sort of became in tune with this? Or
I will say that early on, I kind of knew what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to go up the ranks, and I started putting myself in position to do that. So started, studying and learning and asking questions. And then when I felt that I was mature enough, because I came to the department right out of high school, so there was some growth that had to occur on my part. And I will tell you this: when I put the chevrons on, you don't instantly become this great supervisor, right?
no, of course.
There was a hard transition between police officer, where you hang out and you party with your friends, to now being the boss that has to be accountable for those same friends that you used to party with. And so what I learned is you have to be extremely mature to handle that position. The most important position for me was sergeant, because that's the closest to the ranks. And so it was some growing that had to happen, but it had to happen in order for me to learn how to move into the next level as a lieutenant. And now as a captain, where I'm now responsible not only for police officers, but the same sergeants and now lieutenants. And so I would say that there was not one particular moment, but there was a moment where I said to myself, and this is just being candid, I'm pretty smart, and I'm smarter than some of the bosses that lead me. And so that was kind of like the push to make the transition.
Interesting. Now, even to latch onto that a bit, I mean, certainly you worked in the world, for lack of a better description, of middle management, now senior command, if you will. And, I've heard this many times. A lot of people say once they reach those senior command ranks and had experience there, that, waiting in the pool of middle management, or maybe even supervisor is sergeant, is plausibly the hardest rank in policing. Is that something you would sort of agree with? And perhaps if you do agree with that, any specific reason?
So I would say sergeant is the most challenging, just because, like I said, there's kind of like a transformation that has to happen. But I think they're all individually hard for different reasons. So as you kind of move up, it gets a little bit more political. Your words actually matter. So when you say something, you're responsible for every syllable that comes out of your mouth. When you're a police officer, you can say things and it's kind of, okay. I would say that out of my rank, I enjoyed a sergeant. That was probably the best time and the most challenging time, but I absolutely love being a captain because I'm still really close to the troops. I have a direct impact on the lieutenants and the sergeants. And so right now, this is a really sweet spot to be in.
I gotcha. Interesting. And, and even maybe sort of on the same sort of notion there. So there's a sentiment that, the higher up the ladder you go, it becomes more about strategic thinking, whereas when you're closer to the front line, it's more about tactical thinking. So I guess what I'm getting at, I'm wondering if you started to notice, again, as you reach these more senior roles, if you were doing more of certain things or new things and less of other things. So, for example, I know you talked about higher up the ladder, it's more political and words matter, things of this nature. But maybe from the day to day, or just, the steadfast parts of the role, is there anything concretely you've noticed that someone perhaps who wants to aspire to these more senior positions, it really in any field, that they should maybe start to turn their mind to a little bit more, and as opposed to that sort of tactical mindset when they're really in the thick of it in the front lines?
Absolutely. So everything becomes what's best for the agency. That is gonna go in your mind over and over again. Is this good for the agency? Because you're no longer just thinking about yourself. It is about what's best for the organization. Will the organization benefit from this? Will the organization be harmed from this? And so you are thinking very strategically about every decision. And now you're managing bodies. So you have to start thinking about, what is that detail going to entail? What is my overtime going to look like? And sometimes officers, and I was one of them, We just thought that there was an abundance of money that set up the top and you just kind of, it rained down on you when you wanted to use it. But now I'm in management. It's like you get a pot and you better make that pot last until you get another pot. And so you really start thinking about strategic decisions and what's best for the precinct that I work at.
Excellent. So I tell you what, and sort of a continuation from that, as far as trying to, people, I guess, aspiring to realize these roles and trying to put their minds in tune to how they can maybe best develop themselves to put them, their best foot forward. And sort of maybe some parting words as far as any maybe insights, advice. And I know, as I always say, there's no magic pill as far as go do this degree, this certification, and then no problem, you'll be the next chief. But, anything maybe that you found to best help you, anything that maybe you concretely and we're sort of cognizant about to put into play. And again, maybe that is academics, maybe it's just, your personality, whatever the case. The floor is yours.
So I would say to people, absolutely learn all you can. Get as much training, education as you can, but that doesn't necessarily make a great leader. To me, a great leader is somebody who encompasses empathy, compassion. They're able to have tenacity, because there are going to be times where you're going to be exhausted and you still have to get out there and put your best face forward. And you have to be calm during a storm. So the worst thing that a leader can be is be all over the place when their officers are going through something tragic. They're going to look to you for that calm, and you have to be that person. I say to people when I meet them, do what you can, when you can, for who you can. And that's how I lead. I try to help anyone that I can, whenever I can. And I always try to leave somebody better than when they met me. And so that's what I would tell people.
Excellent. And I'll even sort of second that. And I know you live and breathe leadership. I mean, where you and I first met was sort of inadvertently on LinkedIn, and I see all your leadership means. So I certainly couldn't think of anyone more applicable to have the gracious opportunity to sit down with you. So I thank you so very kindly joining Captain LaShanna Potts of the Detroit Police Department. And of course, for all of you watching, we appreciate you tuning in to all the episodes, and we will see you on the next one. Calling All Leaders with yours truly, Brian Lass. We'll see you on the next one.